When you picture ancient Greece, what pops into your head? Probably things like democracy, philosophy, maybe those beautiful temples against a perfect blue sky, right? Well, today we're going to peel back that shiny marble veneer and look at the invisible foundation that held all of that up, the massive system of slavery that powered an entire civilization.
So on one side, you have all the greatest hits: Plato, Pericles, the birth of democracy. That's the Greece we all learn about and celebrate. But then, look at the other side. That was the reality for so many people. The miners, the cooks, the nurses, the guys rowing the ships. Their labor was the invisible engine that made all that other glorious stuff even possible. And we are not talking about a small number of people here. The figures are, well, they're just staggering. In most Greek city-states, somewhere between a third and a full half of the entire population was enslaved. I mean, think about that. To put it in perspective, in Athens, the very birthplace of democracy, scholars estimate there were something like 80,000 slaves to only about 30,000 adult male citizens. So, this is the main takeaway, the thing you really have to grasp. Slavery wasn't just a part of ancient Greek society, it was its entire operating system. It was the bedrock. Every single major achievement, from their philosophy to their military power, was completely and fundamentally dependent on this system of forced labor.
Okay, so what did it actually mean to be a slave in this world? We've got to dive into the pretty brutal legal and social reality that defined their entire existence.
The Greek word for it was doulos, and what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that slavery in Greece was not based on race or ethnicity like in some other parts of history. A slave could be from anywhere: Thrace, Syria, they could even be another Greek. It was all about a legal status. You were, quite simply, property, owned by another human being. And being seen as property had some truly horrific consequences. I mean, you had zero political voice, you couldn't legally get married or own anything yourself, and your body was subject to the absolute whim of your owner. In the eyes of the law, you were a living tool, not a person.
So how did someone even end up in this situation? You know, freedom in the ancient world was a pretty fragile thing, and there were several well-trodden paths that could lead you straight into slavery.
By far, the most common way was war. Captured enemies were just routinely sold off. Piracy and kidnapping were also a constant danger. You could be a free person in your village one day and sold at a market hundreds of miles from home the next. And while Athens did eventually get rid of enslavement for debt, the simplest way in was just being born to a mother who was enslaved. It was a self-perpetuating system. Now, it's important to know that the experience of being a slave wasn't one single thing. The kind of work they did varied wildly, which led to vastly different lives, from being a trusted manager of a household to being a totally disposable laborer down in the mines. You know, most enslaved people worked in homes, doing everything from cooking to literally raising the children. Some were incredibly skilled. They worked as doctors, accountants, or master artisans. You even had so-called public slaves, the demosioi, who worked for the state as clerks or police assistants, sometimes even supervising free citizens. But no matter how much trust or skill you had, you were still not free. And then you have the other end of that spectrum. The silver mines of Laurion, just outside Athens, were basically a death sentence. The work was absolutely brutal, done in these dark, airless tunnels, often by men, women, and children shackled in chains. Your life expectancy down there was not long. And this just perfectly captures the central mind-bending paradox of it all. The silver that was dug out of the earth through this horrific slave labor, well, that was the very same wealth that paid for the mighty Athenian navy. And that navy,
It defended Athenian democracy and the freedom of its citizens. The liberty of the few was literally financed by the death and servitude of the many.
So that brings us to the day-to-day reality of being property. How do you maintain control over such a huge part of the population? And was there any hope at all for escape or freedom?
Well, control was maintained through absolute power and the constant looming threat of violence. An owner had nearly unlimited power over a slave's body, and while killing a slave wasn't exactly encouraged, it certainly wasn't treated like murdering a citizen. Fear was the main tool of control, plain and simple.
And if you want to understand just how deep the dehumanization went, get this. In a court of law, the testimony of a slave was only considered valid if it was extracted under torture. The core belief was that an enslaved person's word was basically worthless unless it was literally forced out of them by pain. Despite all this, there was a path to freedom. It was called manumission. Now, it was difficult, and it was rare, but it was possible. A slave might be able to save up for years to buy their own freedom. Or they might be granted it for loyal service. Or they could be part of this religious ceremony where they were symbolically sold to a god, which put them beyond human ownership. But, and this is a big but, freedom did not mean equality. A freed slave became what was known as a freedman, not a citizen. So yeah, they could work for themselves and own property, but they could never vote, they could never hold public office, and they often still had legal obligations to their former master. They were stuck in this gray area, no longer property, but not really part of the club either. And this all leads us to the great unresolved question at the very heart of ancient Greece. How did the same people who gave us these incredible ideas about democracy, liberty, and justice, how did they rationalize owning other human beings? Well, the philosophers didn't really question the whole system, they actually justified it. This famous line from Aristotle pretty much sums up the attitude of the time. He literally argued that some people were just naturally built for slavery, just like others were naturally built to be masters. It was just the proper order of the universe to them. So, when you boil it all down, we have to face the fact that all those amazing achievements we admire, the majestic Parthenon, that powerful navy, even the spare time and leisure needed to sit around and think up philosophy, all of it was made possible by the labor of people who were denied the very freedoms being celebrated. The enslaved people of Greece, they left almost no records of their own. Their stories only really exist in the margins of their owners' documents. And that leaves us with one last, really important question. How can we truly understand a civilization when its very foundation was built by people whose voices were systematically and completely silenced? It's something worth thinking about.